Hello! I have not had many updates on the Stop Killing Games campaign in a while, but this is not for a lack of things to talk about. If you recall in the wrap-up video, I said I don't like doing the news on it now unless there's more of a purpose to it. See, ever since we got the signatures on the European Citizens Initiative, I've been more or less following orders from the political insiders who have been assisting us. And it's become much less about getting internet attention and far more about political maneuvering and attention of regulators, that sort of thing. I've been sitting on lots of information because that's what they advised. And now I'm being advised to tell everyone what's happening, or most of it. So on that note, I have lots of updates. Some of it is maybe bad news, but most of it is good news. In fact, let me start off by saying I think we're gonna win this. Namely, the problem of publishers destroying video games that you've already paid for. Now, what I can't say is when or which method will happen first. We have so many avenues in play, and the more I learn, the more I see this could become a quite convoluted path. But the reason I have so much faith in us getting a win is that the law is on our side on this. We could lose 5 paths we're pursuing and still get a win. Let's start with the maybe bad news first. The meeting with the EU Commission is coming up very soon, and we actually have no idea what to expect. Now, what I'm hoping happens is once we've explained what's going on in the games industry and how the practice of game destruction is largely violating EU law, the Commission will realize there's a problem and bring a proposal to EU Parliament, or at the very least clarify existing law on the issue. However, we've had some events that could suggest that won't be what will happen. One of the biggest is this will actually not be our first meeting with the Commission. Back in October, members of the initiative were invited to discuss the possibility of getting our issue added to the Digital Fairness Act. Now, I wasn't there, so I'm getting this secondhand, but from what I've been told, it wasn't great. I'm told it felt like the Commission had been prompted with lines from the industry. They apparently kept emphasizing how video games are a living, breathing thing because of constant updates. Oh, yeah, that totally doesn't sound like an expression the industry came up with. Though I admit, that description pairs well with the Stop Killing Games movement. I'm pleased with how the organizers responded to this, explaining that your phone receives lots of updates also, but if software support ends, you still get to keep your phone. They were also concerned about this preventing new games from being made, specifically teenagers in their bedrooms creating small games. Now, my first thought was, oh yeah, all those teen solo developers creating live service games. You may as well be worried about discouraging teen lawyers from opening up law firms out of their bedrooms. I mean, the vast majority of developers, let alone teens, are not making live service games, especially the kinds that create the most problems in the industry. But then it hit me, wait a minute. I actually can think of a teen who made a live service game. Nelson Sexton made the game Unturned at 16 years old. It's intended primarily for online play and receives frequent updates. There are many who would define that as a live service game. Oh, but what's this? It already had private server support? So he was never part of the problem in the first place. So this exact and very rare scenario that the Commission is concerned about has already happened. And if our initiative had existed, it wouldn't have interfered with him in any way. Everything would have still been fine. And it wasn't small either. It's had 24 million players. So a 16-year-old was able to figure out how to do this in 2014, but major publishers worth billions just keep struggling with this concept. I'm having a flashback here.
It's impossible.
Nelson Sexton
I was able to build this in a cave with a box of scraps.
Though a developer does not have to be Iron Man to not destroy their game. On the contrary, the vast majority of them don't do this. A publisher has to go out of their way and do lots of extra work to design a game to stop working when support ends. It's a very deliberate decision. Also in the meeting was our old favorite talking point. The Commission was concerned that we were asking for endless support from publishers. It was explained, no, we're not. Publishers can end support anytime they want. We're asking that they don't also destroy what they've already sold to the customer when they do so. I don't blame the Commission for needing clarity on that point. The industry keeps trying to push this mischaracterization of us over and over and over. Anyway, there were mixed opinions on the meeting, but I'm told the overall vibe was that it felt like the Commission was trying to find reasons to not include our initiative, which is unfortunate, since I'm told by EU staff that we set a record in the number of comments received by the public on a pending EU act for trying to be included in the Digital Fairness Act. Additionally, if you look at the purpose of the Digital Fairness Act, look at what it says it's trying to address. According to the European Commission, the effectiveness of EU consumer protection is undermined by insufficient enforcement, legal uncertainty, increasing risk of regulatory fragmentation across member states' national approaches, and the lack of incentives for businesses to aim for the highest standard of protection. That perfectly describes our problems with how the law is currently functioning in regards to publishers destroying games. And part of the act is even focused on video games. So yeah, I'm missing how our issue is a poor fit for the Digital Fairness Act. But it wasn't just that. The meeting kind of bled over into the Citizens Initiative also. But the real closer came at the end, where the Commission told us point blank they are pursuing a deregulatory agenda. And yes, the initiative is asking for regulation. So if the Commission has already decided it wants to deregulate, I could see where that might be a problem. Now, ironically, after the meeting was over, I'm told some legal experts involved came up to the organizers and said to please pursue this issue because it's worthwhile, and it is a fight that needs to be fought. See, stuff like this is exactly why I have no idea which way the Commission is going to go on this. More on that point, this next part gets weird. On July 10th of last year, back when we were still collecting signatures for the initiative, the EU Commission released a statement titled Ready Player EU. It then took it down the next day so fast there wasn't even time for Wayback Machine to archive it. I never even got a chance to read this article. However, a reporter for news outlet Euractiv did, and you can see the headline for yourself. Commission preparing token gesture for angry gamers and game developers. The EU Commission is preparing a non-binding communication on the video game sector, likely in response to an ongoing citizens' initiative calling for rules to stop killing games. What's more, in the article it says a spokesperson blamed a technical glitch, but said full publication is planned for 2026. I'm honestly not sure what to make of this, and the political insiders helping us aren't either. Or rather, they're divided. Some say that the Euractiv article misread it, and this means nothing. Others are saying, no, that article is reading between the lines, and the EU Commission has already decided to make a non-binding statement on this issue, probably encouraging the industry to self-regulate. Well, I feel like this goes without saying, but in case it doesn't, self-regulation from the industry is not a good solution for two big reasons. Probably more, but I can think of two. First, the practice of publishers deliberately destroying games with no expiration date that customers have already paid for has been going on for at least 13 years. Battleforge is a notable example of one of the earlier ones from 2013. So the industry has already had over a decade to self-regulate, and that's led to the situation becoming so bad that's what led to over 1 million people petitioning the EU Commission about it. And they're still going. Hell, at the time of this video, Anthem got permanently disabled by Electronic Arts just last month. It sold 5 million copies and now no one can run it again, and people are not getting refunds. This is what industry self-regulation looks like. We're living it. So we've already tried it this way for over a decade and it's getting worse. That's why we want law enforcement. Believe me, I was hoping the industry would solve this themselves. I don't want to be doing this. Second, the industry has built a history showing it's terrible at regulating itself on this issue. I refer back to my earlier video where volunteers did a study examining as many games as they could find requiring a connection to the publisher. Well, we've since updated those results on a wiki anyone can check out. Out of over 600 games with this design that the industry has ended support on, the publisher let the customer keep their purchase about 4 to 6% of the time, depending on how you measure it, due to some games only being partially destroyed. But let's take the most generous interpretation and say it's 6.5%. That's terrible under any standard. If you scored 6.5% on a test, that would be a failure. Self-regulation is not working. So I don't know what to make of this leak by the EU Commission. But if that Euractiv article is true, then I admit that caught us off guard. Because that means the decision was already made before we even got a chance to present our evidence. We were still collecting signatures. I mean, if you look at the European Citizens Initiative process, that's like taking the absolute final step of the process and moving it up to step 3 here. Well, if that's what's happened and the decision's already been made, wouldn't that make the other steps pointless? It kind of reminds me of an old Onion video about the election results accidentally being leaked before the election. Oops. Now, just to be clear, I'm not saying that's what happened. I don't know. I'm saying having this leak during the height of our signature gathering was weird, and that Euractiv article only increased our concerns about whatever the EU Commission has planned. Now, I'm hoping this is all just us worrying about nothing, but I've seen this issue get ignored again and again long before the Commission ever heard of it. So I'm kind of biased to expect the worst here. I'm just showing everyone why we have concerns the meeting might not go well. So that's the maybe bad news. There's a lot of good news. Because we don't know what kind of answer we're going to get from the Commission, we're trying not to take any chances. Thanks to volunteer help, we've been making serious inroads in EU Parliament, and at this stage, I've been told we have majority support, and our issue will be brought before Parliament, and it's in a good position to get passed. Now, EU policymaking is quite complex, so there are more steps beyond that, but that's good news. Next, the movement as a whole will be launching an official NGO on the issue of game destruction. Now, if you're like me, you may have some skepticism on how much this can do, but there are definite advantages. The first is this will allow us to do long-term counter-lobbying on this issue. I mean, we're hoping to get the Citizens Initiative passed or added to the Digital Fairness Act, but if those fail, there's still the possibility of being added to the Digital Content Directive revision. We're trying to find a way in any way we can. This will also signal that we're not just going away on this issue. I mean, I might. I've been at this for over a decade, but the movement isn't. If there's a lobbyist showing up again and again at the EU Commission, that might influence things. This will also allow for more watchdog action. Like if you recall, I helped organize a multilingual site with easy-to-follow instructions for reporting on the crew to consumer protection agencies. Well, maybe the NGO could set something like that up for every big shutdown where the game is destroyed in the future. There are lots of smaller angles too that can increase the pressure. Like I would bet it starts to get a lot easier to get refunds on games that get destroyed in many countries, even before all the legal matters are settled. Now there's a lot of people involved now, so I'm not trying to dismiss anyone, but you can thank Moritz Katzner and his team for spearheading the NGO and helping us with so much influence in Parliament. Since we got the signatures, in my opinion, he's been doing as much for the movement in the political sphere as I did on the issue on everything prior to that, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone. That could be why he tends to not sleep. I've told him he should sleep, but whatever. Edgar Allan Poe didn't like sleep either. So we're going to have a European NGO. They'll have more details later. But wait, there's more. Did I say NGO? I meant NGOs. There's a second one launching also. Yes, there is going to be a second Stop Killing Games NGO, except in the United States. Political activists in the US were inspired by what we're doing and have secured some real funding. And because he's such a workhorse, Moritz is helping them by getting the process started to pass legislation in multiple states. He's even flown out to DC to get the ball rolling. It's underway. He's setting it up so that the US members will take over. I admit, I did not see that coming. That we're having law drafted on this in the USA before the EU. Now, before people get too excited, I've never hidden the fact that I'm very skeptical of our odds of changing this in the US. Because unlike the EU, the legal foundation isn't there. So the only way to fix this is through new law, but I would love to have my cynicism proven wrong. At the very least, it won't hurt anything and can raise more attention on solving the problem either there or elsewhere. Actually, what I kind of hope this does is maybe give the industry some pause. Like, should we be spending millions on fighting this issue when we could be spending thousands, if that, just fixing the problem so our customers stop lobbying against us? Like, I get why the industry fights so hard against regulating predatory monetization. If the video game industry can't push microtransactions on kids and gambling addicts easily, that could literally cost them billions. So while I'm not a fan of that, I at least understand why they spend a lot fighting that. But our issue, having bare bones end-of-life plans, that's peanuts. They are absolutely spending more money on lobbyists to fight this than it would take to fix their development process, and then the cost would be almost nothing afterwards. And as a bonus, then their customers would like them more. Now, between the two NGOs, I'm told they also plan to make this a global movement. I don't have any details yet, but maybe they could follow up on our consumer action in Australia. Or maybe they could get lawsuits back on the table in Brazil like we attempted earlier. I don't even know everything they have planned, but it feels like this is coming together to apply pressure on this from all sides. But back to the EU. I said earlier I think we're going to win this. That's because there are two basic ways we can win. The first and the best option is introducing new law that specifically addresses the problem, like we've been doing. Doing it this way can make the transition as easy as possible, take industry concerns into account, and it's faster. But let's say we lose on all fronts on that. Say the EU Commission doesn't want new regulation, getting support in Parliament isn't enough, we can't push the Citizens' Initiative forward, we can't get in the Digital Fairness Act, and we can't make it into the Digital Content Directive. If all that happens, the new law is out, which means our only option left is enforcement of existing law. See, the thing that gets forgotten when talking about the initiative is that it's very likely large portions of the video game industry have already been breaking the law when destroying customer copies of video games for a long time. There's just been no enforcement on it. My theory on what happened is in the United States, the law that allows companies to do this was basically settled back in the 90s. So what I think happened is the rest of the industry kind of copied what the USA was doing, even though in the European Union, the laws that were supposed to protect customers against practices like this never actually went away. I've mentioned before how earlier we got help from members of Parliament to ask the EU Commission questions on how exactly these types of games are governed. And we referred specifically to terms like can be terminated at any time for any reason in user license agreements. Well, the Commission itself said that these may be a violation, but need to be handled on a case-by-case basis. Well, if they stick to that, that's unfortunate, because that's going to create more chaos for everyone, really. First, this clause here is not a few isolated cases. I want to say 98% of all games sold that require a connection to the publisher have a clause like this. It might even be 100%, I don't know, but it's almost all of them. Look at any major game where you need to connect to the publisher and it's going to have some variant of this term. So handling this case by case, country by country, is going to flood the courts doing it this way, with different penalties and interpretations for each. But I guess that's something the NGO could help with. The situation on this issue is already in chaos now. This would just send it all into overdrive. At this point in time, no country in the EU has a clear answer on how to handle the situation of a publisher selling you a game, giving you no time frame for how long it lasts, then deliberately disabling it at a later date. Do you know how I know this? Because we already tried to find out. Back in 2024, we had people from countries all around the EU reporting to consumer agencies on the company Ubisoft disabling the game The Crew. Germany, Netherlands, Sweden, Spain, Italy, Croatia, we had volunteers in the majority of EU countries trying to get an answer on this. Now, the EU recommends doing this through the European Consumer Centers Network. So that's what we did. Or we tried to. The results were chaos. Most agencies had no idea what we should do. A representative from Germany even said that there is no clear legal regulation on this. In several cases, we had contradictory answers from the same country. So if you called in the morning, they might tell you you were entitled to a refund. If you called in the afternoon, they might say that there's nothing they can do. You would have more consistency asking a magic 8-ball. Now, we eventually managed to bypass the ECC network since that went nowhere, and got thousands of complaints sent to the consumer protection agencies in France and Germany. But that was almost 2 years ago, and they're still trying to figure this out. At the time of this video, no country in the EU knows how to handle this situation. And as a reminder, this problem has been going on for at least 13 years. Well, really the practice began around 2004, but the negligence side started around 2013 at the latest. I mentioned those questions to the EU Commission earlier. Those were asked because neither members of European Parliament that we talked to, nor their staff knew the answers to how this practice is regulated. Even though the video game industry is worth hundreds of billions, this rather fundamental issue for customers has managed to slip through the cracks of governments all around the EU. Again, the best way to solve this situation would be to have a clear regulation addressing the problem. But if we can't get that, we have to do it the messy way, through the consumer agencies one by one trying to figure this out, and probably through the courts. Now, why is this worse? Well, a few reasons, both for consumers and the industry. First, this is way more bureaucratic overhead. Having dozens of governments across every country trying to interpret what the law says instead of having clear rules from the EU. Case by case is going to be very messy for a practice that's being done across the whole industry. Second, this method is way slower. It's already taking years for consumer agencies to process one case. I suspect they'll find Ubisoft guilty of something, especially the DGCCRF, then that may lead to a court case against them, then that will go through appeals, then maybe after that it goes to the European High Court of Justice. This path moves at a glacial speed. Third, this way is going to be harsher on the industry. See, the Citizens Initiative talks about customer copies being reasonably playable, giving some leeway for how many features need to be intact. The courts could be far less lenient. Also on that note, the Citizens Initiative is not retroactive. It can't be under EU law. But courts finding companies guilty of violating law that's already on the books can be enforced as far back as countries want to. So this path has way more penalties for the industry and is way more disruptive. But if the possibility of new regulation is truly off the table, then this is all we have left. But don't take my word for it. Law professor Alberto Hidalgo Cerezo, PhD of the University of São Paulo, who has the Madrid Lawyers Bar Award in International and European Union Law from 2019, has been working on a 500-page legal study on this issue. Alberto actually did his PhD thesis on this subject, was awarded summa cum laude, an extraordinary doctorate award in 2020, with it being published in the #1 law editorial in Spain, Aranzadi, in the collection Great Treaties. The study is still forthcoming, but I talked to him about the legality of the practice of publishers selling a copy of a game with no time frame, then later deliberately disabling the customer's copy permanently and offering no refunds. According to him, that is unlawful and constitutes at least a breach of objective conformity according to Directive 2019-770. In all honesty, he brought up so many points on why this is unlawful, I got a little lost. But he emphasized that the buying and selling of a contract is a transfer of property, both in the physical and the digital world, and you can't simply say you'll end the contract at any time without permission or cause. He had some good legal quotes pertaining to that, such as, "The validity and enforcement of contracts cannot be left to the discretion of one of the contracting parties. Also, no one may be deprived of their property except by competent authority and for justifiable reasons of public utility, always subject to the corresponding compensation." He also mentioned that this may circumvent Articles 17 and 38 of the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights, and that this falls under Articles 4.2.f, 12, 114.3, and 169 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. And that's on top of Directives 9313 EEC and 2019-770 that the EU Commission mentioned. He thinks that EU consumer law is among the best in the world, and I'm inclined to agree, so we came to the right place to get this problem examined. Now, I'm not doing him justice. For those interested in this part, we plan to have him appear in a video later on going into detail on this study so you can hear about it directly from him. More news, that's the EU itself, but in Poland, we've been in touch with the Polish government and they've been very supportive along with the major opposition party in Poland. So there's support across party lines on this issue there. I mentioned the ongoing consumer action in Germany and France, though in France especially, all news I've received suggests we're going to get as fair a hearing as possible on this issue by the DGCCRF. We can't ask for more than that. And hey, maybe that NGO can help activate more countries on this. We'll see. We're building momentum. When it comes to the issue of game destruction, all signs point to the video game industry breaking the law on a massive scale in Europe. There just hasn't been any enforcement on it. I think we'll change that, eventually. Again, we'd prefer to just work out a sensible new law to make this as easy as possible on everyone. That's why we use the terminology reasonably playable in the initiative. Similar to the Right to Repair Directive, talking about a reasonable price or a reasonable time. We want games to be reasonably playable. Now that has some interpretation, but deliberately disabling every customer copy of a game is not reasonably playable. But what that phrase means is we're leaving maximum flexibility to the industry for how they achieve this, and are open to any solution that solves the problem. But we do want to solve the problem. We are sticklers for that part. Now, I've been asked to point out in the statement lobby group Video Games Europe made on us, they said they're looking forward to discuss their position with policymakers, which they no doubt have, and those who have led the European Citizens Initiative in the coming months. Well, that was 7 months ago, and we still have not heard one word from them. They're welcome to contact us, and in fact, the movement is preparing meetings in the future to make it even easier. They're invited for public discussions. Anyway, that's the news for the EU. Elsewhere, I didn't really cover it at the time, but our government petition in the UK did get brought before Parliament, and it was declined. But that wasn't a huge surprise. The UK was always more of a long shot. It simply doesn't have the same consumer protection laws that the EU does. That said, there actually may be another angle to get protections in the UK later on that I'm not at liberty to talk about yet, but that one's really iffy, even more of a long shot, so don't count on that. For our intents and purposes, the UK is probably cooked. Probably. Outside of Europe, in 2024, we submitted complaints to the ACCC on The Crew in Australia, and a law firm stated that it had been escalated internally there, and they are still making their decision. Like Germany and France. So there's just more waiting to do there. And ironically, it blows my mind that the USA is currently in the lead for things happening first on this issue. But I still have a lot of skepticism on how that turns out. The takeaway from all this is while I hope we have a favorable answer from the Commission and can really start solving the problem, don't be discouraged if there's nothing to celebrate from the meeting. We're working around it just in case. We are coming at this issue so hard. When you consider the NGOs, the consumer agencies, possible court action, the initiative, working with Parliament, legal studies, hell, even the US bills. But most of all, EU law is already on our side on this. We're gonna find a way to make this work. Your guess is as good as mine which one, and there's actually even a couple more things going on I can't talk about yet. That could be a path to victory also. Now, as much as I don't like how this campaign keeps derailing my life, I'm really happy we're getting lots of competent help now that can hopefully take this over entirely at some point. At the beginning of the campaign, I said this is all an amateur effort. That's becoming less and less true now. We're getting more and more of the help we need. All right, that's it. We'll see how things go with the Commission.